What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Cosmic Wonder. I'm Warren, and we just got our second to last episode for X-Men 97, and what an ending to that episode. If you were anything like me when you watched it, you were probably left speechless. But they finally did it. They finally gave us that insane moment from the comics where Magneto rips the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. And what a way to just leave that episode. Just end it right then and there. The X-Men going up against Magneto and Rogue and Sunspot. Cyclops interrupting Professor X, essentially kind of causing this to happen. Kind of sounds familiar, right? Another big scene where a hero interfered with what could have been the stopping of the villain.
No, you did not!
Epic nonetheless, and next week is the finale. If you weren't aware, this has been a 3-part finale. The last episode that we got, episode 8, was part 1. This one, episode 9, is part 2. And then, of course, episode 10 is the finale. And everybody is wondering, how exactly is this going to end? And how will it set up season 2? It is confirmed that we are getting a season 2. And it sounds like they pretty much have it done already. So they know already at Marvel Animation what exactly is going to happen next. So they'll probably give us a pretty big teaser. A lot of people, of course, are thinking Onslaught, especially after these events that just happened in this episode. After they happen in the comics, that's when we get Onslaught. We'll talk about that in a bit. But also Apocalypse and the Phoenix. So in this video, we'll break down the key moments of episode 9, but also talk about what we might see in the next episode and what we might see in season 2. If you are new to the channel and you love Marvel and X-Men 97, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss our breakdown next week of the finale. We're also giving away an Xbox Series X and a PS5 at the end of every single month to subscribers. All you got to do is be subscribed to the channel and leave a comment. We pick a random winner at the end of every single month. So let's get into X-Men 97 episode 9. So at the end of episode 8, Professor X returned a little late, but he's here nonetheless. And Magneto sent out basically a giant EMP that essentially destroyed all of technology on the planet, setting the planet back an incredible amount of time, which is why in X-Men 97 episode 9, they talk about how they have to get Magneto to reverse it. Now, I'll just hit you with a theory right away. We talked about this last night during the live show, but one possibility for the X-Men being able to reverse what Magneto did is Rogue taking the powers of Magneto and doing it herself. It is also possible that Professor Xavier could control Magneto and get him to do that himself as well. But one thing I don't think is going to happen is Magneto will come to his senses and he actively will decide to undo what he did. I do not think that's going to happen. I could end up being very wrong. I'd like to know what you think, but I do think either Rogue or Professor X is going to use Magneto's powers via telepathy or Rogue's powers to undo what happened. But the episode starts off with everybody dealing with the aftermath of what just happened at the end of episode 8. Professor X is back on Earth in his X-Mansion that was destroyed by all of the Prime Sentinels. He can no longer walk because he doesn't have the Shi'ar exoskeleton that he was using before to walk, so he's back in the wheelchair. Magneto is back in his old costume, implying that he's going back to his old ways, which we definitely see in this episode. He even tells Charles to shut up. Meanwhile, Jubilee and Sunspot are dealing with some angry humans who, if you notice, are even more mad than before, with one woman even stating, "You thought Genosha was bad, just you wait." This is showing us that humans right now haven't really sympathized with mutants and what happened at Genosha. They still view them as freaks who they can't trust. After all, Magneto just did destroy all of the power. So it seems like we're getting further and further away from Professor X's dream and going along the lines more of Magneto. And right now, at this point in time, go ahead and let me know if you are Team Magneto or Team Professor X. We did a poll last night. We had over 900 votes on our live stream and it ended 50-50, right in the middle. But go ahead and let us know which side you are on. If you were a mutant, you got to put yourself in a mutant's shoes. So the humans are chasing Sunspot and Jubilee, which I find kind of funny because they could just use their powers, but they're trying not to hurt them. They get cornered in an alley, but then Storm and Ford show up, finally, rocking killer comic accurate suits. And we've actually seen Forge in this suit before in the animated series. Then Magneto makes Asteroid M again, which was originally supposed to be a safe haven for mutants. This eventually became Genosha, but by Magneto making Asteroid M again, he is basically stating, along with what he did last episode, war against humans. This is going to be my safe place away from humans, and mutants who want to follow me can follow me, but besides that, we're going to attack Earth. We are going to attack humans. We are not going to try and get along with them anymore. We are the superior race, mutants, and we will show them that, which they get into in this episode. Then we have something really interesting happen with Bastion. He goes back and he gets his mother, who of course is a Prime Sentinel, and we can see all of the other Prime Sentinels frozen. But what is really interesting about this scene is two things here. He takes his mother back to their old home, and if you look, when he lays her down, she's crying. So she's still very much alive. It just seems like she's kind of depowered. She can't move. There's no power to help power her or any of the Prime Sentinels anymore since Magneto sent out his giant EMP. But then Bastion says this: "It's finally quiet, mother." This is a reference to his origin story that they showed us before in previous episodes. Since he is a technopath, he can communicate with other forms of technology, and we saw that he struggled with this as a kid. He was essentially communicating too much without realizing what was happening. He could basically hear all of these machines all around him at all points in time, and he really struggled with it. But now that Magneto has wiped away all power, all technology, he says it's finally quiet. So for the first time in his life, he's not hearing millions of different machines at the same time. So now all the X-Men are back at the X-Mansion, which of course is destroyed now, which is why Jean says that Nightcrawler is going to transport them to Muir Island, obviously using his teleportation powers because they have another base there that has more gear. The island exists off the coast of Scotland, and in the comics, it's where Moira McTaggart founded a mutant research center on this island. But before they go there, we learn a few very important things. One is that Cyclops is not really following the professor anymore. He doesn't agree with what he did, how he left Magneto in charge. And if you notice, when all of the X-Men are meeting together, it is actually Cyclops calling out the plans. And when talking about the plans, Wolverine says that he has to kill Magneto, but then Professor X finally comes in stating, "Logan, if you have to punish someone for today, then start with me." And notice the look on Cyclops and Jean's face as Professor X comes in. They're not happy, and it really looks like they don't want him there. Even as Professor X comes in talking, Cyclops kind of just continues on with his plan, saying, "Rogue, you're going here, Storm and Jean are going to lead Gold Team," and basically lays down the plan, not really listening to anything the professor said and just kind of ignoring him. And also, the Gold and Blue Team are from the comics. We have seen this before. And we can see the divide in this scene. Professor X explains that he almost recruited Bastion as a member of the X-Men because Cerebro picked him up, and basically explains that since he is a technopath, he is essentially the new Master Mold. He controls all of the Sentinels, all of the Prime Sentinels. He is the mainframe that is in charge of everything and powering everything. So Charles basically tries to come up with his own plan, but then at the same time, Sunspot's like, "Yeah, but wasn't it your plan to leave Magneto in charge? And he's now one of the bad guys." Cyclops interrupts and basically says, "Look, I've told you all what we need to do. We're going to Muir Island, then we'll split into our teams. Let's get to work, team." And Professor X looks at him, realizing that it's kind of Cyclops in charge right now, and they don't really like Professor X right now. And we talked about this previously, but I do believe that this is going to lead to a division with the X-Men. We see that in this episode, but in season 2, I don't think we're going to have the same X-Men team, and I don't think Cyclops will be a part of the team. More on that in a bit. So we learned that Forge and Beast basically make a collar that can neutralize technology. Basically, if they put that on Bastion, he will be powerless and cannot communicate or control the Sentinels and Prime Sentinels. So that's the X-Men's plan. They break off into 2 different teams. Blue Team to go and find Magneto to try and get him to reverse what he has done, and Gold Team to go and take down Bastion once and for all. Also, something to point out here is that Storm does come back, but she has no idea what has happened. She has no idea what happened with Madeline prior. Remember, she was not there for any of that, but notice that that's not really addressed here. She just comes back and is happy to see her fellow X-Men and her sister Jean, although she has no idea what just went down with Jean. They do kind of allude to this later on when they're in the plane and Storm's about to jump out. Jean tries to stop her and Storm says, "I thought of you while I was away, my sister in the darkness that she had to face and overcome." But then she says that she's a survivor, a phoenix, so she was most likely in this moment referring to previous events, not what she went through with Madeline. Then Rogue has a moment with Professor X, which again shows us that there is a divide with the X-Men, and some of the X-Men really don't trust Professor X anymore. Professor X talks about Gambit, and they even talk about the Thieves Guild who recruited Gambit originally. But talking about Gambit just makes Rogue more upset, and you can tell that she does place part of that blame on Professor X, in which he does say that he's sorry for Gambit, and he even mentions Moira, who again should have a connection to Muir Island. So they want to go and fight Magneto, but Magneto brings it to them. And this is possibly one of the best monologues that we've gotten ever with the history of Marvel here. He talks about how he sold mutants Professor X's dream. Professor X left him with the X-Men, with the X-Mansion, and with the dream that mutants and humans could live side by side in peace and harmony. And he made mutants believe that they could actually be safe at Genosha, and he specifically mentions Leech, who he told in the beginning of the series that he didn't have to be afraid anymore. However, with the attack against Genosha, Leech ended up dying right next to Magneto, and Magneto explains what he saw, his eyes literally being vaporized from his skull. So now Magneto is done, and he's basically made a new Genosha, Asteroid M, and he tells all the X-Men that they've gotten to where they are right now. The attack on Genosha, humanity hating them, the Prime Sentinels, everything by following Professor X. So he offers them a new choice. Follow him. And Rogue follows, and notice that she's wearing Gambit's coat, but she gives it to Professor X as she leaves. And then of course Sunspot, because, well, he was betrayed by his own family. That's enough to do it. He also breaks Jubilee's heart while doing that. Very, very coldly, might I add. He says, "What else is left here?" And she says, "Me." And then he's like, "Nah," just powers up and leaves. Doesn't say anything at all. On Muir Island, we have a really cool moment between Cable and his father, Cyclops. Couple things here. One is that Cable really does, again, acknowledge that Jean is not his mother. The clone of Jean, Madeline, is his mother who physically birthed him. And Cyclops essentially says, look, it is confusing, but Madeline is gone, and Jean is who Madeline was cloned from. And both of them are obviously very similar and two of the strongest people that he's ever known, so give her a chance to be that mother figure. She, after all, does share all of the memories that Madeline had, even the memories and the feelings of giving birth to Nathan, aka Cable. Then of course, I already posted this on Instagram last week, but we get this epic scene where they kind of poke fun at the Fox X-Men. Cyclops throws Cable a new X-Men suit in which he asks if he's going to a war or a circus, and Cyclops says, "What you'd expect. Black leather," which is a direct reference to what he said to Wolverine in the X-Men 2000 movie.
What'd you expect? Black leather?
You actually go outside in these things?
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
Professor X meets with President Kelly, but he is doing this psychically. As you can tell by the background, it's all space. And even President Kelly is saying this all happened because you left your legacy to a psychopath, to Magneto. So you can really tell how everybody is really upset with Professor. But even in this moment, Professor X still kind of does defend Magneto. He says he's not a lunatic, he's a survivor, and time has proved his worst fears over and over again, essentially saying he has a reason to believe what he believes. But at the same time, rely on my X-Men to get the job done. And this moment is just incredibly awesome as we see the X-Men slip into some original comic accurate costumes, which are just fantastic. Jean's Marvel Girl, Cyclops' blue costume, Wolverine's brown and yellow one, Storm, who we've already seen in already, and Rogue, who seemingly was already wearing something extremely similar to this before she left with Magneto. And then of course, Professor X's. So the two X-Men teams, Gold and Blue, go their separate ways. Then Jean and Cyclops have a moment before going their separate ways as well. Now again, Storm and Jean have this moment where Storm mentions Phoenix. And the end of this episode leads us to believe that Jean has died. However, I don't think she actually has. I think she's going to return as Phoenix. And even when Rogue is leaving Magneto, she says, who's going to be next? Jean? Is Jean going to die next? Been there, done that. Which could also be hinting that, yeah, she might seem to have died at the end of this episode, but yeah, that's happened before and she's came back. So I have hope for Jean. So Gold Team heads to Bastion and he is more than ready for them, connected to everything. He controls a mass amount of Sentinels for a huge army that he has. And again, he is connected to each and every one of them. Storm and Forge fight them off while the rest of them go on the ground and search for Bastion. Then we get a really epic fight here with Beast, Morph, Jean, and Cable. Morph turns into the Hulk and Hulk smashes, or as he says, Morph smashes, and it looks like Jean even helps him fly, smashing the head off of a Sentinel, flying into a diner that says DeMaio's Diner, which is a reference to writer Bo DeMaio of X-Men 97, who has done a fantastic job, but unfortunately, due to some circumstances that we do not know about, he was fired. Beast drops his classic one-liners that we love, makes quick work of some Sentinels, even slapping one with its own hand. But of course, the big part here is Mr. Sinister showing up to Jean. And he wants her for experimenting, and he tries to essentially convince her to go with him, saying, only I know where you end and Madeline begins. If you want to know, I can tell you when I swapped you, so you can know what was yours and what was Madeline's. Did you marry Scott or not? Did you have the Phoenix Force, or was that Madeline? It's tempting, but in this scene, we essentially find out that Jean has come to peace kind of with everything, and that Madeline is with her. She carries Madeline with her. And we see just an epic fight here with Jean using bowling balls with her psychic powers to fight against Mr. Sinister. And it's worth noting that she essentially defeats Mr. Sinister. It actually takes Cable coming in, being controlled by Mr. Sinister to defeat Jean, which we'll talk about in just a bit, because meanwhile, Blue Team arrives at Asteroid M. And side note, still no idea why Wolverine is on Blue Team. Why is he the person who has adamantium all throughout his body going up against Magneto, who can control it? Something that has always baffled me and always will continue to baffle me. He should have been on Gold Team, but it resulted in a pretty epic ending to this. So the X-Men start to fight Magneto, Rogue, and Sunspot. Rogue tackling Wolverine, with Professor trying to go up to Magneto and reason with him still, saying that thousands are going to die, but Magneto says thousands of mutants died at Genosha. And whose lives matter more, mutants or humans? It's the basic conflict between Professor X and Magneto here. The only difference is it truly does seem like Magneto no longer really cares that much. Of course, he probably still cares a little bit, but he doesn't really care about what Professor X's friendship means to him at the moment, because he's done. I don't believe he wants to kill him or anything like that, but I believe he's not letting him stand in the way anymore, and he'll do what it takes to no longer have to deal with the human threat to mutants. And if that is killing some X-Men, then that is what he has to do. And ultimately, he puts a piece of metal over Professor X's mouth and says, I've always wanted to say this, shut up. But overall, the plan here for the Blue Team changes. Professor X obviously realizes Magneto's not going to reverse what he did on his own, so he tells Cyclops telepathically, I have to hijack Magneto's powers, and I have to control him and make him do it myself, because he's not going to do it. So we have to get his helmet off so I can control his powers. Now, ultimately, this does end up happening. Wolverine jumps on him, and he does manage to take his helmet off. Professor X manages to control him. However, unfortunately, Gold Team is dealing with a bit of a situation. Sinister ends up controlling Cable. You can see the gem on his head, which means Sinister is in control. And since Cable is so incredibly powerful, being the offspring of essentially Jean/Madeline, one of the most powerful psychics there is, and Cyclops, Cable is just incredibly powerful, and he's about to kill Jean. So Jean telepathically communicates with Scott just to say, I love you, before she evidently dies. Now, I kind of think that maybe Jean lets Cable do this, because she still kind of does feel like Cable is part her son and maybe doesn't want to have to kill him. So maybe she lets him do this, or maybe he's just that powerful. Again, he is the offspring of two incredibly powerful mutants. He more than likely could be stronger than her, especially being controlled by Sinister. But unfortunately, Cyclops sees this and he knows that Gold Team needs more time. So while Professor X is controlling Magneto and reversing everything, Cyclops interrupts it, just like Star-Lord interrupted the Avengers taking on Thanos. Unfortunately, this results in Magneto throwing his helmet on Professor X, blocking his powers, and starting to crush it to kill him. Again, not sure he would have actually killed him, but in this moment, maybe he would have. But fortunately/unfortunately, Wolverine jumps in, stabs him through the stomach/chest area, stopping him from killing Professor Xavier, but unfortunately pissed Magneto off enough to where he did something that he's always wanted to do: rip the adamantium out of Wolverine. This is an incredibly huge moment from X-Men 25 in the comics, and even if you haven't read that, you've most likely at some point in time probably seen the image of it. What an incredible moment that I didn't actually think they would do in X-Men 97. Now this leaves us with some questions. One, no, I don't think Wolverine is dead. There's a lot more story that they can do with Wolverine. He'll simply have his bone claws. I do believe he will heal from this, and there's a lot more story to tell in season 2 and a confirmed season 3 as well. We're also led to believe that possibly Storm and Forge are dead. I don't think either of those two are dead. They'll pick up with those two in the next episode. However, Jean and Onslaught are kind of the big topics right now. Is Jean dead. Again, Phoenix is mentioned a lot, and in the opening intro, we have seen the Phoenix a lot as well. Is this hinting that this story is going to return, that Jean is going to return? I believe so, but the only question is she going to return in the finale in the next episode, or is she going to return later on down the line? The reason I believe that it could be later on down the line is because I think we might be leading to a huge X-Men division in season 2 / at the end of the finale. And I think that if Cyclops believes she's dead, he'll leave the X-Men team, and we kind of could get that Cyclops anti-hero storyline. I think we probably do get that in season 2. And then Jean returning could be what brings him back. Now, of course, after this event happens in the comics, after Magneto rips the adamantium from Wolverine, essentially Charles does a lobotomy on him. And then Charles has all of this built up anger, remorse, sadness, basically every kind of emotional / negative feeling that Professor X has ever really had comes in contact with Magneto's feelings of anger and rage and vengeance and also grief. And they connected this way when Professor X went and shut down Magneto's mind. And the result of this was Onslaught, a sentient psionic being created from the consciousness of Professor X and Magneto, and one of the coolest characters we've really seen. Now, I don't think he's going to show up in the finale. I think this might be a season 2 thing. If he does show up in the finale, that might be what the X-Men need to defeat Bastion. But I feel like that would be introducing a lot very quickly for a finale that's probably only going to be 45 minutes to an hour long. So most likely season 2. Another thing that I think we might see in season 2 is the return of Apocalypse. Remember, Apocalypse is not dead. He is simply kind of trapped for the time being. The reason I hope Apocalypse will return is so he can make Gambit a horseman, essentially bringing him back to life, and that way is how we could get Gambit back. And I also think Rogue is going to go a little rogue, but I do think she is going to leave the X-Men with Cyclops, maybe go their separate ways, but she's not going to be a part of Professor X's X-Men anymore. She obviously left to join Magneto, but Gambit could be that person that brings her back if Apocalypse turns him into a horseman. So really, a lot of things could happen in season 2 that seem very, very exciting, but the big question is, how will season 1 end? We will find out next episode. So drop all of your theories in the comments down below and let me know what you thought of episode 9. It was certainly insane and I loved it. Please don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can get the next breakdown for X-Men 97 and future Marvel videos as well. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and Apple Podcasts and Spotify. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Woof woof.